shall we start, right, El Shaddai? So
Yep,
welcome. So good morning, good afternoon, Erev Tov, all the possible time span of our day. It is my pleasure to share with Charles today this symposium that I found very important. We both will try to approach a very complex, challenging, and I would say important topic. Um, I want, as a convener, to introduce Charles Small, who is the founding director and president of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Polity, ISGAP, the institution that hosts our series. And he's also the director of ISGAP Wolf Institute, that is an institute for fellowship training programs in critical contemporary anti-Semitism studies. He's a fellow at the St. Edmunds College in the University of Cambridge. And I will shortly introduce myself. I assume by now you know me. I'm Judit Bokser-Liwerant. I'm a distinguished professor at the National University, the UNAM. I'm also a distinguished visiting professor at the Hebrew University and co-editor of a series that's called Jewish Identities in a Changing World. This is our main, I would say, way of introducing ourselves. We both share our research focus on contemporary Jewry, anti-Semitism, and other ways of discrimination, exclusion in today's world. So we have to decide who is going to start. As a convener, Charles, I will invite you, if you want, please, to start, and then I'll follow you.
Thank you, Judit, and it's nice to see you and some familiar faces and friends online. So I'll be brief. Today we're discussing the work and life of Alberto Nissman. I know from some of the people here on the call that you knew him personally and knew of his work for some of the people. And I think in a way, would like to just give brief reflections. I had the distinct honor of meeting Alberto on several occasions. I remember meeting him at the Durban II conference in Geneva. We were there together. We were with the Simon Wiesenthal group out of Argentina and other people, other delegates there. And this was the Durban II conference. Durban I, as many of you know, many scholars, Erwin Kotler, Alan Dershowitz, and others really see this as a watershed moment in the war against the Jewish people, the war against Israel. The Durban conference in 2001 was supposed to be a conference that would mark an international fight against racism. And the conference is really hijacked by many NGOs and other actors that really turned the whole focus on the demonization of Israel and the Jewish people, and was sort of this watershed moment in this sort of international war against Israel. Durban II, I remember going there, and Ahmadinejad actually spoke. This was on Yom HaShoah in the UN conference in Geneva. It was on Yom HaShoah, and we had a conference, side conference there on incitement to genocide. We commemorated the Holocaust. We had a speaker from Darfur, and Erwin Kotler, myself, and others were speaking about incitement to genocide, the sort of the demonization of Israel that started in a new wave in Durban I. And then on Durban II, we had Ahmadinejad and the Iranian axis really inciting to genocide there. And Alberto was there fighting the fight, sort of documenting the connections of Iran in South America, and into the United States, into the Americas, the sort of the corruption that existed between the West and the Iranian revolutionary regime. I remember Alberto came to a big conference that we helped to organize at Yale University in 2010, and I remember he gave a presentation on the connections between Argentina, the United States, and the Iranian revolutionary regime. Um, I know he was working on some very odd deals between the president of Argentina, the Obama administration, and trade involving uranium between Argentina, Iran, with apparent blessings of the Obama administration. This is a scandal that I don't know if it's been completely uncovered, but I know that there's some serious people working on this issue and taking it seriously. I remember Alberto speaking about how through Venezuela, the Iranians were moving people and resources into South America. And there was a chain of migration, potential sleeper cells, terrorists going from Venezuela into Mexico, into the United States. And this was in 2010. And I think some people took Alberto's work very seriously. And as you can imagine, in the United States at that point, many people, I would say, rejected his work and were probably very much antagonized by his work and his bravery and his steadfastness to sort of uncover all sorts of corruption involving the Iranian revolutionary regime and its international proxies and web of trade and terror in the Americas, in the triangle between in South America with Brazil and Argentina, and really sort of uncovering this. And I think, from my perspective, he really took on the powers. Henri Bernard Levy always says that the obligation of a true intellectual is to shed light where there's darkness. And Alberto was really steadfast on trying to shed light where there was darkness. And I suspect he actually paid the ultimate price in his pursuit of justice and truth on these issues. So he was really a very humble, remarkable intellectual, and a man on a crusade to uncover the truth, and I think fight for democratic principles, and certainly fight against these nefarious actors um, of the Iranian revolutionary regime and corruption that was assaulting democratic principles and certainly the Jewish people around the world and the state of Israel. So his memory is a blessing to many people, and I think it will continue to be. And to me, he was really, I don't know, a very special, humble intellectual that was really fighting the fight with his mind and with his words and with his research. So he should rest in peace. And for people here who knew him, I'm sure his memory is always a constant source of blessings and inspiration. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. Then let me join this reflection, first saying that indeed I knew Alberto Nissman, and moreover, we shared at least 2 sessions that where terrorism and anti-Semitism were analyzed. One was organized by the American Jewish Committee in Miami, that was on terrorism today. And the third person that shared our table was Claudio Grossman, to whom I will refer later. Then I want also to underscore, because I think that his figure and memory is closely related to the AMIA in all the aspects, to the Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina, the core center of Jewish life in Argentina. I myself graduated from the teacher seminar at the AMIA, that magnificent building that was bombed. And I was there precisely the day that it was bombed. And I was there to meet one dear colleague that she was organizing the anniversary of Jewish colonization. I refer to Anita Eppelbaum, that then was the head of the Mark Turkov Center. So Nissman, as we all know, was from September 2004 until January 2015, the date of his assassination, the head of the investigative unit for the AMIA case, which is the Unidad Fiscal para la Investigación de la AMIA. The bombing, as we all know, killed 85 people, left hundreds wounded, and destroyed major portions of the building, almost all the building, which served, as I said, as the heart, the institutional, cultural, social, and political heart of the Argentine Jewish community. And as has been divisive, the impact of the bombing and the assassination of Nissman, so it is divisive and polarized the approaches to explain and understand what happened with the AMIA and with Nissman. Indeed, the death of Nissman provoked what Grimson called a crisis of interpretation that engendered and exposed more social division than an imagined community, as thought by Anderson. Grimson argued that Argentina passed through a cultural crisis. The eruption of an act of great significance has affected our interpretative frameworks and unleashed an hermeneutic war, one in which, to the pain and distress that this man's death produced in us, we must add the distress of once again realizing that Argentina is a country that suffered from the cultural incapacity to share liminal experiences. I would continue and say that this same impact had on the Jewish community. So there is a strong connection with the AMIA and what happened, and Nissman and his assassination. And its impact has been underscored on the Argentine society, and we want to underscore on Jewish community. You know, while listening to you, Charles, I wrote as a subtitle to this reflection, Men in Times of Darkness, which is the volume, the important volume that Hannah Arendt wrote about all the people that lived and thought and reflect of times of darkness. So in that meeting that we shared, Claudio, Nissman, and myself, the subject was terrorism today, specificity on the AMIA, and we approached the global, the regional, the national, and the local dimensions. And he considered and underscored rightly that AMIA was part of this act of terrorism that constituted a watershed in the international scene, and certainly in the links that today redefine the interaction between terrorism and politics. An act that had a determining impact on what became terrorism in its different dimensions, the modalities it assumed in its scope and magnitude, its victims, the type of organization that carried them out, and the links with the states that supported them, and of course, the impact on the very countries in which they were carried out. To think about it today, after October 7, gives us really a critical moment of reflection. So, Prosecutor Nissman's testimony showed precisely, as you refer, Charles, that by pointing out to the complex relationship between the various factors and actors involved in the AMIA case, their motives, how its ultimate impact was marked by the weakening, if not breakdown, of the basic values of life in society, of the security offered by a state to its citizens, and in the credibility of justice. This has been really a watershed in Argentina and in the region. And he underlined then, I remember well, that this case, far from being approached as a suicidal act of desperate population, represented the confluence of difficult processes for new international protagonism and a new order, a new world order that we also testimony today. Certainly, Buenos Aires became, and he understood it well, the terrain, and this I want to underscore, and I dedicated a piece to Nissman where I wrote that Buenos Aires became the terrain in which the internationalization of the Middle East conflict took place and expressed a great paradox. Those who deny the Jewish identity of the State of Israel are the same ones who extend the conflict to all the Jewish communities in the world. Hence, as the investigation of the AMIA illuminates, all the levels were articulate, right? Both the AMIA case, as you all know, and Nissman assassination became really dark moments of a public process. I currently underscore that while the bombing of the AMIA had a generalized impact on society, and evil was able to build a new door of entrance and breaches for the Jewish community into the national scene, we should not dilute the fact that it was an attack on its Jewish population. It was not on, the election was not whatever and whoever in Argentine society, though for solidarity and other reasons so was defined, but it was on the Jewish community. Now, a few days before the 10th anniversary of the death of Nissman, the Federal Prosecutor Office in charge of the case, led by Eduardo Tallano, just confirmed that it was a homicide. It's a report of 56 pages that stresses that the crime was motivated by his investigation into the AMIA bombing and his denunciation of the President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner for the signing of the famous Memorandum of Understanding with Iran. So this homicide was linked to his work with the AMIA. It is very important to underscore, we don't have time, but I want just to say that there were many irregularities in the investigation, not only of the AMIA bombing, but of the Nissman case. Tallano himself reports details of numerous irregularities detected in the early stages of the investigation: lack of adequate custody, fire in the Casa Rosada, which is the official residence, because this fire in the basement destroyed the records of income and expenses that Nissman has requested to verify the meetings related to the memorandum with Iran. And also, it's underscored the manipulation of the crime scene, the unconstitutionality of the memorandum placed Nissman in a very vulnerable situation. And moreover, it underscores the connection between the intelligence services, the executive branch, and the AMIA investigation. And this comes out in the report. The classification has been ordered, the requested access to the documents, right? Now, it is very important. It is impressive. If someone is interested, should go and see this report. And all the time you have in the horizon of the report this strong AMIA institution, its role, its scope, its symbolism, its concrete reality, how it was founded during the 30s, how it was institutionalized during the 40s, and then how it became the Kehillah Ashkenazi community of Buenos Aires. As my colleague Leonardo Senkman wrote, and we wrote a joint article on this, this was the symbol of the ethnic sociability and communal culture that was the Kehillah. This framework transcended the borders of the local ethnic Jewish Argentine community and was reflected both the will to integrate into Argentine society and its links with world Jewry. Now, on this same tone, in the report, of course, there is an absence of the anti-Semite motive. There is allusion, there is the Jewish case. Now, it's interesting, that my young colleague that we just met, Ariel Dulitsky, in 2 sessions ago, he just sent me a draft, as he said, a quite elaborated draft on well, it's interesting because he defines that he will analyze what happened 30 years after the attack on the institution, 30 of the Holocaust, and prior to October 7 of 2023, and he analyzes the behavior of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that delivered finally a sentence on the Amian case. And the decision of the court, according to his consideration, represent a landmark in terms of adjudicating a human rights case related to a terrorist attack. That's very important. The court found that Argentina didn't take reasonable measures to prevent the attack. Remember what I just pointed regarding the last report, that there was lack of a careful follow-up of Nissman. And the court concluded that Argentina is responsible for the violation of the rights to judicial guarantees and to judicial protection, failing to meet its obligation to research, investigate the attack and its cover up with due diligence and within a reasonable time frame. So, Ariel, you consider, and I agree with you, the AMIA decision has many positive elements, but it lacked one central question. It failed to consider the anti-Semitic dimension of the attack, the disparate impact on the Jewish community, and the potential anti-Semitism present in the judiciary power and in the enforcement and intelligence agencies in charge of the investigation of the crime. The court failed, according to your analysis, that I see very robust and very, very important documentary references to properly address the situation of the Jewish community in the country in 1994, the broader context of anti-Semitism, and certainly the explosion of the Israeli embassy 2 years before that. So what we have here is, I would like just briefly, in order to finish my intervention and open it, several institutions, Jewish institutions, international institution, human rights association, they presented precisely that how can it be that this anti-Semite and this vulnerability of the Jewish population was not addressed. Over there, of course, the role of Claudio Grossman was central, as he headed precisely the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. He was also director of the American University in Washington. So, indeed, the bombing affected all the society, affected the Jewish community in very different ways. It affected the truth in its own leadership. It caused division, inner divisions, and it brought, I would say, the subject of memory as the main resource for a community that couldn't approach truth. There are many works. I'll tell you, Charles, after you decided to convene this symposium, I've been looking on over the recent production, and there are lots of articles, serious articles, where the building of truth, the break of memory, the identity crisis are extremely organically related both to AMIA and Nissman, right? And of course, many of them stress the national dimension over the Jewish dimension. That's very important to say. So there are many more aspects that we can't approach now. So I will finish saying that, of course, Nissman figure symbolizes both the strength of the struggle for justice and against anti-Semitism, but also he represents the vulnerability of a political actor that suffer precisely in the context of the society. And this brings us to finish and say, whenever we find references to the Jewish dimension, it's mostly related to Israel than to the Jewish condition. This, I would say, this differentiation in between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and how we approach a legitimate critique of a policy that crosses the border and becomes a critique full of prejudices that allows us to make an equivalence between these two processes. There is a differentiation, as I presented in my session, the opening session, in the motives and in the outcomes of a legitimate critique of the policy of a government and illegitimate questioning of the existence of the State of Israel, and one step more of the Jewish condition. So we are here in a moment, in a critical moment, though, where Nissman, Alberto Nissman, was trapped in this situation. Also, his assassination caused differences and debates inside the Jewish community, as was caused in the fight to clarify what was the truth after the bombing of the AMIA. So if memory, that's what I thought yesterday when finishing my notes for today, that memory seeks to make the universal and the particular to converge, to create a new common agenda, shared memories in the framework of a process in which intolerance persists. And this is truly a very critical challenge. So this is what I want to share now this morning with you. And Charles, I may listen, I want to listen to you, and of course to all our colleagues that are sharing our session today.
Thank you, Judit. Actually, inspiring overview. Thank you. So I think I'd be happy to open it up to comments or questions, thoughts, reflections.
Okay, so who's here?
If
So
you
I
could
see
raise
so
your
many,
electronic hand, that would be helpful.
yes, I see so many
I think
dear
Sergio is Sergio, you
Sergio.
want to say something?
Okay, I'd say hi all. Well, I have a question, and in fact, with Judith, we have spoken of so many things and so many issues. I don't recall we discussed this particularly. The question is, what has been, to the best of your knowledge, the impact and the reaction of the Nissman case in the state of Israel? My own impression, but I may be wrong, is that there has been no impact at all. Not a topic for high-profile public discourse, not, of course, what at times happens, even pretext for demagogy and for populism. Nothing of the sort. I think it is strangely absent. To be true, I think to some extent this is also true of the Amia bombing, which in my own perception, up to a point has been before October 7, Amia was perhaps the most terrific and horrific and glamorous episode since 1945 against the Jews. I may be wrong, but in any case, it was targeted against such a significant building and such a powerful Jewish institution, such a symbolic significance, continental, and yet in Israel this has not become one of the central topic of argumentation. I mean, it would be so easy to say, look at that, and therefore such and such implications. But specifically, the Nissman, even less. And so I wanted to ask you first whether my perception is correct, and second, what you think about that.
Well, you're right. I think that's a very important dimension that we should approach in a more systematic way. We do agree, and here we are, you are there, and Florinda Goldberg is there. I remember that when we finished the book, Belonging and Otherness, one of the critical moments was when you insisted that you wanted in the image the building of the AMIA, right? Because indeed it represents a turning point, a watershed. We do have, regretfully, several watersheds, as you refer prior, Charles, to the Durban, right? The Durban one. But here, it was really a tragedy. Also, there was a very important presence of the state of Israel the day 24 hours after the bombing. After the bombing, Israel was present, and there were references to the community, to the fact that your people already arrived, their research is in the hands of your country, right? All these as you, they were there, And you know, it also carried in Argentina all this mention of dual loyalty. Now, who are there? The citizens of Argentine, the Jews, the Israeli. So everything was a moment of confusion. But of course, Israel was representing. I mean, Israel once again, to my understanding, assumed the official role of representing the Jewish people. Yeah, so this was precisely also after the Shoah, right? Who would defend the memory and the judgment, etc. So what happened there? I think that on Argentine, we do have material to further explore. But I agree with you, Sergio, that I don't think that in Israel, it had this impact, and we have to explore it. I would prefer to explore it more. If it had, as far as I remember, it was to underline the vulnerability of the Jews in the diaspora. But of course, there were other dimensions that were not explicit. It was the presence of the United States. All the intelligence agencies of the states, all its interest, it was Iran. So I think it was there a very complex moment that I don't think it was able to transcend to the public and became sort of standard. Also, I would say it reinforced this strong image that Argentine was always an anti-Semite country, an anti-Semite society, minimizing all the other dimension of collaborations. So my answer would be your question is relevant and we should go and seek after it with more details.
May I add some information?
Please, Florinda.
Tonight, one of the Israeli channels, Channel 13, is starting transmitting the series Objetivo AMIA. It's a series that was elaborated, I think it's a co-production Argentina and Uruguay. And it's a series that deals with, as it says here, los atentados en Buenos Aires, the two attacks. I imagine that it's also the embassy. So it will be very interesting to check afterwards the rating of the series and if it has any effect, any repercussion in the Israeli scene.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Florinda. That's very important. So it's a call for us to follow it and discuss, right? What is the repercussion, right? Who
Marcia,
else? Sorry? Who else
Marcia,
would like?
if you would like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Judith. I have two questions, in fact, because I'm not sure, I might have misunderstood. You mentioned the last report. When was it published? You referred to the last report in your presentation. When was it published? How can we get hold of this
Oh,
report?
I'll send you immediately. It was now, right now, this year, and I'll send you precisely the reference. Yes, of course.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
And
yes.
with regards to your presentation,
And sorry, and the other report is the one that I refer to Ariel's work, right? That has to
Yes.
do with the court. Okay, these are the two ones. One in
Yes.
Argentina. Yeah, okay.
But I, with great pleasure, I would read Ariel's as well. But I wanted to read the official one from Argentina.
Yes.
And the other question is with regards to the status quo now. What's going on what stage, are there any investigations taking place? What is the status quo now with regards to the murder and assassination of Nissman? And the points that have not yet been clarified with regards to Nissman and Amia, of course, as a consequence, right?
Yeah.
If you have this information, I would appreciate to have a summary on that.
Yes, yes, it continues. It continues to go on. I shortened exactly to say how many documents, new documents are coming that include hundreds in the case of Nissman. Let me look to the precise number that I wrote in front of me of telephone conversation. This has been a source that continues to multiply all the time. The investigation is open, testimonies are coming, and of course, I want to tell you what I refer quickly, and I want now to go back, is that precisely it has been seen not as the case in itself, but as an manifestation of the polarization of Argentine society and the concept of building of truth. This has been, a new trend in research. So how narratives, what happens is that now you have the risk to relativization of narratives, right? So if you bring the relativization of narratives, then you put into questions the possibility of reaching a truth, right? Sorry, here I am. The research goes on, and the reference is to 126 bodies of more than 20,000 pages, different 8 cases related to the process, more than 900 testimonial statements that continue to be received, more than 500 telephone subscribers have been incorporated. And then you have here, of course, all the technological expertise carried out by the National Gendarmería Nacional, right? How do you say gendarmerie, right? They are under scrutiny, 180 computers. So here you have the possibility to build a no solution. You have so many plural and diverse that you may really build a process that cancels the possibility. So this is the situation. And it goes ups and down, to my understanding, Marcia, with the situation, the global situation and the political situation, right? Iran is over there all the time. The political confrontation in Argentina today, the role of Cristina Kirchner, right? So all this is under, I would say, the same horizon of a crime that probably you will never reach the final clue. But what is important is that in the 2 cases we referred, there is a recognition that it was a crime, a homicide, and the theory that he committed suicide has completely been displaced.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who else? Daniel Feinstein, you are there? Yes.
Thank you, Judith, for your presentation. I have a problem with my voice. I wanted to a short comment. You mentioned the polarization of the Argentinian society, and we can say that this polarization reflects in the Jewish community in the same way, and those who were supporters of the Kirchner regime were eager to believe the theory of the suicide, and the others the opposites. But we need to mention that I know for very close sources connected with the issue that there was a very important group of families of victims of the AMIA who were very critical of the work of Nissman, that he didn't advance almost anything and he was traveling all around. So besides the fact that he was murdered and it was a terrible crime, there were strong critics inside the Jewish community towards his performance as the leader of the case AMIA. And these polarizations continue to be until today.
Yes, Daniel, you are more than right. You are more than right. If I overlook this, this is not justified, of course.
Of course.
Of course not. And they were extremely critical of his inactivity, a sort of paralysis, right? That only came in the last time and due to other reasons. Yes, I agree with you. That's very important. Ariel, unmute yourself.
Yes. So one of the things that I would say is that even today it's unclear. Everybody here says that Nissman was killed. Still, there is a strong debate in Argentina. Just the criminal investigation was reopened, and we concluded that he committed suicide. Now it's reopened to reinvestigate that it was a homicide. But that, for me, that reflects in part the problems of the investigation of the AMIA itself, that is all messed up, corruption, cover-up, unprofessional behavior of the investigators. And the same happened with the Nissman's death. There were 50 people in his apartment 2 hours after his body was found, nobody protecting the crime scene or anything like that. And also, in terms of what you said about my paper, what I'm trying to show is how the Inter-American Court of Human Rights failed to properly address the anti-Semitism that is present there and the disparate impact on Jews in general, the disproportionate number of Jews who were killed in the AMIA bombing, and basically the invisibility of this differentiated suffering and harm produced to the Jewish community, that contrasts with the other cases where if women are killed in a case, the court goes at length discussing gender violence. If there is an Afro-descendant killed, the court goes at length discussing the treatment of Afro-descendants in the context of racism in Brazil or Argentina, for instance. In the case of violence against indigenous people, same thing. And it failed. Is this only first and only case that the court has to decide a case related to anti-Semitism? In its 50 years of functioning, it never had a case, and the first one failed to see that there was a Jewish component in the case. For me, that reflects more the overall problems of the human rights movement in general to properly address anti-Semitism as a form of discrimination, and how immediately as the issue of anti-Semitism is raised in any international human rights context, it becomes tied either to Islamophobia, and we can never talk only about anti-Semitism, or two, immediately comes with Israel, and it becomes intertwined with anti-Zionism, anti-Israel, and it's very difficult to unpack all that. And at the end, what happens is that the voice of Jewish discriminated victims remain invisible.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Very important, the point you say. Here I have in the chat an observation by Betty Mendlovic that she said that because of constraint of time, she will state her comment here. She said that building on previous discussion about implication and consequences that transcend national borders, it would be valuable to explore reverberation in Mexico, whether national society, Jewish leadership, and the Jewish community. Yes, we do agree. And I would add two things. Well, one which is not a curiosity, but is a very important sociological and anthropological conclusion. Many of the spiritual leaders that are religious, spiritual leaders that are in Mexico are also, they come also from Argentina. So in several institutions, it became a part of right. So for example, in the conservative movement, the rabbis, the cantors, and the core, let's say, they are all from Argentina. So you may say that the event transcended borders or became some particular aspect of this, let's say, a Argentine community. As was the case, following what you said, Ariel, and you, Daniel, following what happened with the Argentine exile, that the inner divisions were brought to Mexico and were part of the ongoing conversation. Even the nucleus of organization of the exile was here. The same happened also in the way that people reacted to, not to the AMIA, but yes, to the Nissman case, right? Over there were more. Regarding the AMIA, the critique went to the leadership, to the Jewish leadership in Argentina. Regarding Nissman, went to the appreciation, as you said, the division in between Kirchnerism and the opposition. In fact, what we may conclude also is that it is politicized, of course. It transverses all these moments. And also we may conclude that we have here several new lines of research to continue. The one to Israel, I think that's very important. Charles, I will go to you with these questions. Do you think that this inner discussion on polarization transcended the Argentine, let's say, Jewish population, and was and reflected in, I would say, the more, how to call it, the more general, right, sphere where you develop in ISGAP?
It's a good question. So ISGAP is committed in trying to, I guess, break down some barriers in the intellectual and policy worlds. We're trying to do programming in Spanish and French and Arabic. We've done programming in German. And I think some of the issues that intellectuals and policymakers are dealing with in different languages are slightly different. And it's good to bridge the gap. And I think from my perspective, and I don't claim to be the expert on the issue, but from where I sit, I think there's not great awareness, I'd say in North America, of what's really happening in South America, or what AMNIA was and represents, who Alberto Nissman is, some of the issues that different South American societies are facing regarding anti-Semitism and the reemergence of anti-Semitism. So I think to create more communication and exchanging of ideas is really important. So I think so that's sort of pervasive. Yeah, and I think what happened in Argentina to Alberto Nissman and the AMNIA and the connections, the terror connections, and also the corruption with the Argentinian regime that had implications in the United States and North America. I think through research of experts on anti-Semitism, experts on different societies. If we communicate better, I think we can actually shed light on some of these issues, because I think there's sort of international connections.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll just say, just very briefly, also the work that we're doing with Follow the Money at ISGAP, uncovering the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood through Qatar, and it was previously Saudi Arabia, and also the activities of Iran in North America and Europe, I think is very important to understand. And we're uncovering the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood is investing, we estimate it just in the United States close to $100 billion with a B dollars in higher education, and we're beginning to do research in Canada and in Europe. So the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood and anti-democratic forces in higher education and very important cultural institutions throughout the Americas and Europe is very important to understand the implications regarding not just anti-Semitism, but the health of democratic values and principles, which I think are being increasingly under attack. And I think, just to finish, that as Elie Wiesel always taught, that anti-Semitism begins with the Jews but never ends with the Jews. And we're sort of the early warning system for democratic values. And I think with the increase of anti-Semitism throughout the world, it's really an early warning system for something deeper and more structural that's taking place in our societies. So all these issues are connected and important. So yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think that, of course, the possibility of developing this exchange in our framework series is very important. I also see very important the new initiative you're taking of a new journal, because today the weight of the intellectual debate on public opinion, not only in the sphere of academia, is growing. So that's very important, and the exchange of perspective. So we left, there are several works I went through regarding how was interpreted the theory of the memorandum with Iran as, as a colonial imperialist imposition by the US. So here everything was inside this reality. So as I committed to respect the 1 hour session and not import my Latin American extensive way of working, I want to thank you all of you, and invite you to be in 2 weeks from now in a new session. And thank you, ISGAP. Thank you, Charles, for this initiative. And thanks to all my dear friends that I see here from the state. I see Ariela with us. That's nice to see you. And Betty and Perla from Mexico, and Daniel. That's a great possibility to see friends from Mexico that otherwise we don't meet. And that's great. And Sergio, thank you, and Flo. Well, everyone, really, and Eduardo, everyone. I understand that most of our audience comes to visit our programs afterwards and the recorded session. Well, that's the option. It's free, so we miss them and they miss us, right? And thank you, Adi, our interpreter, for being so present in our sessions.
And Judit, thank you so much for all you're doing too. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.